Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us on another Film Roundtable. My name is Maria Prieto, and I'm here to introduce our panelists today, as well as our guest moderator. But before we jump into the conversation, I'm going to lead us through a moment of silence to honor all reported worldwide 2,288,655 COVID deaths as of today. We're recording this February 5th, 2021. We would also like to honor all of our Black and Brown brothers and sisters, as well as our First Nations brothers and sisters, whose lives have been taken by the hands of police brutality and other senseless acts of violence. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. As you all know, if you've been coming back and listening to these, we hold these moments before every talk, just to bring that awareness. You know, we're still living in this reality of a pandemic. We're still seeing violence. So, you know, just being aware, taking the time to really consider that each time we talk. So today we've invited director Yoruba Richen to the roundtable. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose latest film, How It Feels to Be Free, premiered last month on PBS's American Masters. Yoruba, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Of course. And today, returning to the roundtable as our guest moderator, we have producer Mishka Brown. Welcome back, Mishka, and thanks for leading today's conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Before I hand it off to you, I quickly just want to thank our listeners for their continued support of this platform and to remind everyone to subscribe to the podcast, our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram to stay up to date on these discussions. So, Mishka, all yours.
Thank you. I am very pleased to be talking with Yoruba. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through some of the rest of the films that you've worked on so that folks know the scope of your work. In addition to How It Feels to Be Free, which just premiered in January, and it's streaming on PBS through February.
Yes, so it's on the American Masters website through February 16th, and then it's available on Amazon for rent or own.
And other recent films include the New York Times presents The Killing of Breonna Taylor, which is streaming on Hulu. The Sit-In with Harry Belafonte, The Tonight Show, which is streaming on Peacock and is nominated for 2 NAACP Image Awards. Congrats.
Thank you.
Your previous film, The Green Book, Guide to Freedom, was broadcast on the Smithsonian Channel. It was nominated for an Emmy. Your films, The New Black and Promised Land, won multiple festival awards before airing on PBS's Independent Lens and POV. You won the Creative Promise Award at Tribeca All Access and is a Sundance Producers Fellow. You are 2016 recipient of the Chicken and Egg Breakthrough Award and a Guggenheim Fellow. And interestingly, you're founding director of the documentary program at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. I always love to hear the origin stories of directors. So how did you end up directing?
So I came from a theater background, actually. My mom was a playwright and I grew up in the theater, and I went to Performing Arts High School here in the city, LaGuardia, where I majored in theater. I did a lot of theater in college. And I always had this sort of tug of war between being an actor or being in a director in theater and wanting to work on social justice issues. And, not a tug of war, but always sort of dancing between the two. When I graduated, and I'd always loved documentaries, but, growing up, it didn't necessarily seem like this was a field that you could, go into and make a living from. And then when I graduated college in the 90s, the technology got smaller and more accessible. And it was the first time that I picked up a camera for a class and worked with a friend of mine on making 2 videos. I was in graduate school in a different field in urban planning, but I wanted to, and I was concentrating in community development. And I really wanted to look at how to tell the stories of these communities that I was sort of studying and policy, how to tell those stories about how policy affected these communities in a way that was broader than just writing about it, quite frankly. And so I pitched doing a video it was a community of what was then a mostly African-American community in San Francisco, Bayview, Hunters Point, and how the welfare changes that were coming down in the 90s was going to affect this community. And so my friend and I worked on this video. It was a total trial by fire. I'd never, shot or edited. We did it all ourselves. And it was really a eureka moment where I said, I want to do this. I want to do this. This is great. This brings together my different parts of myself, my social issue part, my creative part, interviewing, research. And then I did another video about public education. And it was after the next year, and it was after that that I said, I'm going to really try to pursue this. And I moved back to New York. I worked at different, for a few different production companies. I found a mentor in a great documentary filmmaker, St. Clair Bourne, who's no longer with us, but hired me. Yes, work. And then I, freelanced for a couple of years, just, working my way up, co-producing, associate producing. I went over to the news side in 2000. I started working for ABC News, and I ended up working in the investigative unit for 4 years. And that gave me another sort of side to, the journalism side and the broadcast news side, and seeing what that was about. And it was a good experience for me in that I got to, pitch stories, work with camera people, editors. And, but I knew I always wanted to do what we called at that time, long form, film, long form documentary. And so I was able to get a fellowship that brought me to South Africa, a journalism fellowship. And that was the origins of my first film, which is called Promised Land. And it looks at land reform in South Africa and the efforts for the Black communities that had been kicked off of the land during apartheid to get their land back. And so I embarked on that journey. Then I got, another fellowship that brought me to Brazil, where I was able to make a short film. And then finishing Promised Land, and I started my next film, The New Black, and started teaching and founded the documentary program at the New York School of Journalism, Graduate School of Journalism. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. You do one, you get the taste for it. You don't know if you're gonna, ever do another, but you you try to use that momentum and get the next one done. And then, of course, at the same time this is happening, the documentary field is really expanding in a way, in a very exciting way in a lot of ways, in that, streamers are coming into the market, cable, right. More, news organizations committing to documentary, and the audience becoming more accustomed to watching documentaries. It's become right. part now of, what people watch, which is really exciting.
Well, you have gone through follow-up questions 2 through 10, because I was definitely going to ask about making documentaries before the current boom. It was a very different world.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I joke about this in my regular life, right? Like, I went to college before the internet. So, it wasn't until senior year I discovered email. And even in the late 90s, when I started working in documentary film, people weren't using the internet like we use it now. I mean, we still went to libraries to research and, you know, all of that stuff. And now I look back, I'm like, how does one make documentaries? That's like that. So obviously the technology has really changed the game. And, you know, I mean, it's like technology in so many ways. There's a lot of good stuff about it and a lot of stuff about it that, you know, I kind of miss. Like, I loved going to libraries. I love looking through, you know, that kind of tactile research that, you know, this is something that you don't really do anymore.
Even pre-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, pre-COVID, I'm saying even pre-COVID, you're not going to libraries, really. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's just people are, you can do everything online. You can do that research online. But, you know, the basics though are the same. You still are finding a story. You still are finding characters. You still have to figure out how to fund it. It's not like that's gotten easier necessarily. Right. And you still working with a team. And part of what I love about documentary filmmaking is that it's a team sport. And, you know, you work with a team and bring out the best in each other. And it's such a fulfilling, you know, it can, you know, most of the times it's incredibly fulfilling, just from a personal level and a creative level.
Have you been working with the same team on multiple projects? Do they carry over? No, not necessarily. I have, so like my first film, I was pretty much me and an editor. And, you know, so I knew for my second film that I wanted to, for New Black, that I needed to work with a producer. So the role of the producer has gotten really important. And it's always been important, but it's now been really recognized as an essential part of the documentary team. So I was able to work with the producer for the second film. And then, even though we haven't worked together since then, that producer, Yvonne Welbin, started working with Chicken and Egg, which, you know, gave me an award and career mentoring and training. So I worked with her in that capacity. The film, my film, How It Feels to Be Free, the producers and I are actively looking to work together again. So it certainly does happen. And it's great when that does happen. So it's like a larger filmmaking family,
Yeah.
Even if you're not on specific films together.
Exactly.
Which, before we move on, I just want to go back to like when I grasped my chest, St. Clair Bloom, just to honor him a little bit, because he also never met in person before, although we know lots of people in common, but St. Clair was a big part of why I'm in film now, you know, the Black Documentary Collective specifically, when I graduated from work.
Absolutely.
The movies that, you know, the Murder of Fred Hampton, like all the movies that like he educated me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So. And Saint was the first person to actually hire me. And I, when I moved back to New York, and he was friends with my mom, and my mom was able to you know, connect us, and he took a chance on me and hired me. And I was a production coordinator on a film he was producing about Gordon Parks, the legendary filmmaker and photographer Gordon Parks. And I really got to see from the ground up, like what you know, what it meant to make a film, to produce a film. And so it was so educational for me. And Saint also became a mentor. He became, you know, a board for another film I was co-producing. He got, you know, was on the board of advisors for that film. And he was such a committed person. And he also was such a talented person, obviously committed, and just a great person to be around and hang out with, and just sort of soak up his knowledge.
When I knew him, it was during the time when he and Kathleen Cleaver were doing the Black Panther Festival. And I look back now and I'm like, you know, I totally appreciated it then, but not as much as I do now.
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely. So mentorship has been really, you know, really important. I also, was one of the first mentees in the Firelight Media, Stanley Nelson's media mentorship program. And that was hugely important too in helping me on both my first and second film. So yeah, mentorship is incredibly important.
So let's go and talk about how it feels to be free. There are a lot of ways to get into it. I'm just gonna, not to be maudlin, but my mother died in the 90s, not in the 90s, in the 2000s, but when I was pretty young. And that song was what I played on at her funeral. Nina Simone's. It's just so many parts of this movie is like, I think resonant for everyone, but for Black women in particular. And you know, Cicely Tyson, who we're still mourning. It feels like wrong to say just Cicely Tyson. Like I can say Nina, but I feel like she needs like a lady in front of her name to give the.
Well, I called her our Queen Cicely Tyson.
Exactly. That's the proper title. But hearing that you came from theater and like the body of work you did before, can you just talk a little more about how you got to that film in particular?
Sure. Well, as I said, I grew up in the theater, and I grew up with, you know, knowing a little bit about all these women. But when I read the book, How It Feels to Be Free, African-American Female Entertainers in the Civil Rights Movement by Professor Ruth Feldstein, I knew that it would make a really powerful film, because I hadn't seen these women, their story told in a way that wasn't a biography, wasn't a biopic. I mean, not that I'd seen really biopics about these women, but that looking really at how they broke through in their particular time period and field and reshaped representation for Black women, the way that we were seen and the way that we saw ourselves, and also their political work, which was on screen and off screen. So the take of how to look at this cohort of women who sort of built off each other's success, and each, you know, pushed the boundaries a little bit more. I just thought it was a fascinating way to understand, you know, our Black women entertainers' role in the struggle, and also in the political struggle, and also for representation.
There were a few shocking moments of the film when I wanted, you know, when Abbey Lincoln was asked, I hesitate to call him a journalist.
Yeah, a critic.
When she was a critic, yeah. When she was accused of using her Blackness to exploit a career. Crazy, that she was overdoing it. But you know, it's like it's like they could not win no matter what they did.
And you know, what strikes me, so I'd read about that moment in the book, and you know, we had people explaining that moment, but when we found that footage, that audio, and you know, the fact that she had to defend herself, and the fact that the critic was so adamant about it, and shameless. You know, it's just an incredible piece of footage of, you know, what Black women entertainers had to deal with in terms of being judged by white critics and by white standards.
And also, I listened to the album a lot last year, you know, in the protest movement, and her scream, you know, but the Freedom Suite, but on the cover of that album, and she is that album in so many ways. So it's not just white critics. It's like when she was there, I think it was in the movie too, where Black people were saying that she was a troublemaker,
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that, I show in the film, that there's this tension, not only with white society, but with that they're having with their own people. So like, and it happens all, for all of these women. So for example, like one of the things that I thought was so fascinating is Lena Horne, right? She gets this this groundbreaking contract where she refuses to play maids on screen, servants, people in the jungle. And the first African-American to sign female to sign a contract with the studio. And she she gets pushback from the Black people who had been playing those roles, who had been in Hollywood, because they're saying, listen, if she's refusing to play those roles, what does that mean for my career? Will those roles even be, are they going to get rid of those roles? So there's,
Right.
There's that tension that is throughout the film in these women's careers, when you're pushing boundaries and when you're taking risks, that blowback comes from, can come from all different corners.
And speaking of Lena Horne, and St. Clair born, last summer, all the old Black Journal archives and they have the one on the Black woman, right? And you can see it too in your documentary. It's like Lena Horne in particular, there's so much pain and loneliness and isolation, her, as opposed to Cicely Tyson.
Yeah, well, she was, and she said, look at the time period in 1940s, we just come out of Gone with the Wind, and she's, she is insisting on her own representation, and yet they don't know what to do with her. So she doesn't get speaking roles. She's cut out of the Southern market, and but she was a star she was a star too, precisely because she didn't do those roles and she refused those roles, but she was still a star. I mean, Lena Horne was in the Black community and the white community. But she definitely, made a lot of sacrifices, and her career suffered because of the choices that she made and her political choices as well.
What you describe her having to do to even maintain her singing career.
That's right.
It is painful.
Yeah.
But yes, it's interesting. They're all so different. Like all of the ways that they were shaped by what they couldn't do in their political activities, some of it for what they weren't able to do, but for someone like Cicely Tyson or someone like Nina Simone, it's like how much it affected their work. You don't want to say necessarily positively, because goodness knows what they would have produced without having to fight so much.
Exactly. And we have Jacqueline Stewart says that, even with someone like a Pam Grier, who tried to expand beyond Blaxploitation, and face resistance. And it wasn't until really the 90s, right, with Jackie Brown, that we're able to see the breadth of her talent, and thankfully she's still working today. But that was the case with all of these women.
You mentioned that your mom was also in theater, and I think about it too. Not just in film, but in some ways, first generation at college, and looking at, in the movie, looking at you also have like Lena Waithe and Alicia Keys, like a later generation, Halle Berry, but the numbers in terms of representation, it's still really small and still challenging. But like, do you feel any particular not burden, but like the question is, what do we, like our generation, do with the freedom that we have,
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think is so interesting, just the first part of what you just said, is that, I grew up you know, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, watching television. And, you know, there was very few choices that had, very few things that had in film or television, you know, and I was a movie, you know, I watched all those teen movies, those John Hughes movies, you know, those, you know, Square Pegs and Family Ties, all that stuff. I totally watched it with, you know, and there just weren't Black people. There just weren't Black people. And, you know, looking back, a lot of that stuff was actually racist. You know, you know, when you go back and watch some of that stuff, it's pretty shocking.
A lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. So, and then of course, you know, we have these breakthroughs. We have, you know, Spike Lee. I remember sitting, you know, being with my mom, waiting online at a theater, you know, that used to be near Lincoln Center. Huge line to get into She's Gotta Have It. Like, it was a huge deal, huge deal. Going to see Do the Right Thing, huge deal. Malcolm X, huge deal. Like, that was like totally, the first time that I saw that Black people, you know, could make a film that was in Hollywood. Then of course you have the 90s, and then, you know, Bill Cosby Show was another breakthrough.
Right.
And then in the 90s, you have, you know, more Spike Lee, you have John Singleton, and then you don't really see anything for a while, right? Like, you don't really see much for a while. Until now, until this renaissance, I would say, of storytelling that we're seeing in television and with streaming. Obviously, that's opened up so much. And showrunners and people like Shonda and Ava and Lena, who are doing fabulous stuff. Issa, I'm calling them by their first names as if, you know, I know them, but you feel like you know them because they're so what they're doing is so amazing. So I'm so happy to have a plethora, you know, my partner and I laugh like, oh, what show do we want to watch? We could watch Blackish, we could watch Insecure, DVR, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing. Obviously, it's still,
P-Valley.
Look at I don't have Stars, so I haven't watched P-Valley. Hopefully it'll come, I'll figure out a way to watch it. But yeah, so absolutely amazing, but yet those numbers are still so small. Right? It's because there was so little before then. But I forget what your initial question was.
It's just that
a responsibility.
It feels, and I don't want to burden, but just like in everything, it's like when I was in college, like it always felt like more than for me, you know? It's like when you're working, it's like a generational responsibility even. Like, totally. I think St. Clair like embodied that too. His dedication to mentoring.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, because I grew up with my mother who was a political playwright, those things were always connected to me, entertainment and politics. And she, in her work, she was really, and I didn't quite understand it, and she's no longer with us, but I didn't quite understand until I was older what she was trying to do with her work, which is articulating the experiences of Black woman, of being Black and being a woman, you know, in various, you know, from history to, you know, she was writing about police brutality in the 1980s. She wrote a play about Zora Neale Hurston, you know, in the 70s. So that.
What's her name?
Her name is Aisha Rahman. And so that sort of melding of those, as I said, of politics and entertainment was which is really about, you know, articulating our history, our experience, and, you know, being part of a cohort of women, of Black women who are telling these stories.
It seems like a good time to bring up your other recent movie, the New York Times presents Killing of Breonna Taylor. I definitely have questions about, were you making them simultaneously? Like, the events that it covers happened less than a year ago, you know? So I'm curious about the process of making it, and were you working on both of them?
So, to go back to How It Feels to Be Free. So How It Feels to Be Free was a 5-year journey. And I had basically the way that I made that film is, we optioned the book in 2015, raised a little bit of development money, did some initial shooting, raised a little bit more development money the next year, did some more shooting, and then it took a couple years to get in the production funding. But I had done, a good amount of shooting beforehand. The money for that came together, the production money all came together literally at the beginning of COVID. So right around—
How it feels to be free?
Or how it feels to be free. So right around like April, March, late March, we had everything in place, and then COVID. So what that meant is that, things had to shut down for a minute in terms of our own production. Meanwhile, then we heard, a couple months later that American Masters, which had been, with us from the beginning, wanted us to have the film by January 15th and to meet that deadline. So obviously, everything was shut down. The production company now that had come on as producers, additional producers, in addition to my original producer, Truth Aid, they were in Canada. So that's where the edit was going to be. That's where, and that couldn't happen because we couldn't travel. So there was a couple of months of working remotely. And as I said, because I had done some a fair amount of shooting and scripting, we were able to start where we were. We were able to start even without doing additional shooting and working, and we worked remotely. Meanwhile, the events over the summer unfolded, and by June, Breonna's case was starting to get more well known. And the New York Times called me, the program, and they wanted to do they wanted to do this film about what happened to Breonna Taylor. And it was something that I, could not say no to. I immediately wanted to be a part of it and wanted to direct it. And so, but that happened really fast. So it was in June and the film came out in September, which is a very quick turnaround. So
for an hour-long piece.
For an hour-long piece, yeah. And an investigative piece. So it's, so yes, they kind of were at the same time, but certainly, because I had to work remotely anyway from, with How It Feels to Be Free, the editor was able to, continue to put together cuts. I was, focused on Breonna.
Were you actually in Kentucky? Were you the one doing those interviews?
Mm-hmm, yeah, I was in Louisville. We drove down. My partner and I drove down to Louisville, and I was there for about 3 weeks. And we, then the editors were starting to work on it.
Were you there with the I'm sorry, were you there with the camera person, or did you?
Camera person, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, camera person, it was me, camera person, and the producer.
Okay.
So it was a small team. We, followed COVID protocols. That's the only time I've shot now with like verite stuff or any of, in-person stuff. The rest of the interviews I've done in COVID have been remote, but we needed to be there for this.
I'm glad that you were there, because those interviews with her mother in particular, but her friends, whole segment where they're just free to talk about her. And I had some of when her mother did me of a Lucille Clifton poem, when she talks about her daughters, when she said she was a better version of me, full of life, to love. Yeah. And friends were like laughing because of who Breonna was to them. And I was just thinking of, outside of the camera, of you in person, like, what does it feel present and shooting during those moments,
Yeah, it was very emotional, quite frankly. And what I came to understand is that, the loss of, it was the second time I've talked about it in the last couple of days, and it's just, it's just really still emotional. So what I came to understand in a really real way is that the loss of Breonna was not just the loss of a daughter, right, or a sister, but the reverberations for the whole community. It was the loss of a mentor. It was the loss of a cousin, of a close cousin, of a friend, of it was a loss to the community, and the community.
Mother.
Prominent, right? Not just the daughter. I started there with the daughter, but the reverberations that go through the community.
No, when she talks about picking baby names, it's just, it's unimaginable. And then you think of it being multiplied.
Exactly. And the fact that, they still haven't gotten justice, and they, it's beyond the beyond, but it was a real, I'm so grateful that they shared those stories with me, and that we were able to tell her story and to give some sense of who Breonna was, and who she was as a person, and the the injustice around what happened to her and to Kenny.
And thinking about it at the same time of the art, and how Queen Cicely talked about the role she wanted to play and embody, and Nina Simone's anger, and like Abbey Lincoln's the need, that what was behind their need to do art and to do it right. It really also resonates when you about Breonna Taylor, because you can easily imagine an hour-long documentary being made about it with none of her humanity.
That's right.
Being shared,
Yeah. And that's why, I think, frankly, when we also made this film in the middle of the racial reckoning that we're having in this country and in all industries, another sort of facet of this whole thing is that even though documentary has, I think, historically, well, I don't know if historically, but is a bit better in terms of having people of color directors and producers. I think it's just a little bit better than Hollywood, but there's a long tradition of other people telling our stories. I mean, and it still goes on. And that you could have seen in some other time that story would, they might not have even thought to have a Black person tell that story, or a Black woman specifically. And that's been a big problem in our industry as well.
Yeah, it contextualizes in a very different way when they say, the report says no injuries.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
You don't get a sense.
Yeah, and as you said, that could have been told without her humanity. And a lot of times our stories, these stories were told without, without the depth of understanding that, we are who we are as people and what we mean to our community and to our family, because our humanity is often not recognized.
And it makes total sense, but also makes no sense that we're still having to just talk about the basic fact that we are human. Right. Black Lives Matter.
Real basic stuff. Exactly. Which is why the phrase Black Lives Matter is so resonant, right? It's very simple. It kind of embodies you know, the inhumanity that we have experienced in this country and still continue to experience on a lot of levels.
Are you open to talk about what you are working on currently and next?
Sure. Yeah. There are a few things that I'm working on. One thing that looks like it's coming to the fore is, you know, it's funny sometimes with short. So it was initially a short piece, and you'd think with short pieces, oh, it's gonna, you know, this will be quick, it'll be done. But of course, because of various things, I've been working on it now for a few years. But it's a short that I'm co-directing with the director, Brad Lichtenstein, who brought me onto the project. And it's about an unsolved murder, a civil rights murder in Natchez, Mississippi, and how the FBI failed to find the perpetrator of this murder, who was the gentleman who was murdered was a NAACP official who had gotten a promotion at a tire plant that was considered a white job. And there was a local KKK offshoot group that is thought to have had a bunch of murders in this community, in this community and in this time period. And this is one of he was bombed, and the son, Wallace Jr., found his body, and we're working with the family to tell their story. And so when it happened, in the late 60s, the FBI, you know, did these investigations, but no one was ever brought to justice. And then the case was reopened under the Emmett Till Act, where all of these unsolved civil rights cases were opened, and no one was ever brought to justice under that act as well. So looking at how the government failed to find the terrorists, the domestic white terrorists who killed him, and in these other cases as well.
Also, sadly, particularly resonant.
Yes.
After the coup attempt.
Yes. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I know we are out of time, but I thank you so much
for
making space for this. It was a pleasure. Thanks for your movies.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.